In the quiet dawn of Harlem, 16-year-old Samuel Johnson pedals his creaky bicycle, delivering papers and milk to help a blind friend, unaware that racist cops are about to shatter his world with a brutal beating that leaves him in a coma, until his father, Marcus, fueled by a fierce love and a grainy video of the truth, takes on a corrupt police department, risking everything to uncover a heart-wrenching secret that could change their fight forever. As you watch, do not forget to subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell to get notified when we share our next video. Samuel Johnson, a young black boy in middle school, was running his job early that morning, delivering papers and milk to people's doorsteps with his bicycle when he was pulled over by a group of cops who kept questioning him despite how much he tried to explain that he ran that path every morning and was not on a suspicious mission. He showed them the papers and milk he was about to deliver, but they insisted he was a thief and began beating him together until he passed out. The air in Harlem was crisp, the kind of early morning chill that nipped at Samuel's knuckles as he pedaled through the quiet streets. It was 5:17 a.m., and the city was still rubbing sleep from its eyes. Streetlights cast long, soft shadows across the pavement, and the occasional delivery truck rumbled by, its engine a low growl against the dawn's hush. Samuel's bicycle, a second-hand Schwinn with a slightly bent front wheel, creaked under his weight as he leaned into a turn onto 125th Street. The basket in front rattled with glass bottles of milk and neatly folded newspapers, each one destined for a doorstep. In this patchwork of brownstones and corner stores, Samuel was 16, lanky but strong, with a face that carried a quiet determination. His eyes, deep brown and always searching, flickered with focus as he navigated the familiar route. He wore a faded blue hoodie, the cuffs frayed from months of early mornings like this one, and a pair of sneakers that were more duct tape than sole. His breath puffed out in small clouds, and he hummed a tune under his breath, something his mother used to sing when she thought no one was listening, a gospel melody that felt like home. He didn't tell his parents about this job. Not because they'd disapprove, though they might, given how much they valued his schoolwork, but because it was his secret, his way of carving out something for himself. His family wasn't rich, but they got by. His father, Marcus, worked long hours as a mechanic, and his mother, Evelyn, was a nurse who always seemed to be on the night shift. They'd raised Samuel and his younger sister, Nia, in a modest apartment on Lenox Avenue, where the walls were thin but the love was thick. They didn't need Samuel to work, but he needed it. Not for himself, but for Jamal. Jamal was Samuel's best friend, a wiry kid with a quick laugh and eyes that saw nothing but darkness. Jamal's family wasn't like Samuel's. His mom worked 2 jobs, and his dad was long gone. Their apartment was a single room where the heat only worked half the time, and Jamal's dreams of college felt like a far-off star. Samuel had seen the way Jamal's shoulders slumped when he talked about it, the way his voice dipped when he said, "Maybe it ain't for me." So Samuel started this paper and milk route, slipping a few dollars into Jamal's backpack whenever he could, calling it, found money, so his friend wouldn't feel like a charity case. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was dignity. This morning, Samuel was running a little late. He'd overslept by 10 minutes, and the weight of the milk bottle seemed heavier than usual. He pedaled faster, the chain of his bike clicking in rhythm with his heartbeat. The streets were mostly empty, save for a few early risers, Ms. Carter, who always waved from her stoop, and Mr. Reyes, who was already sweeping the sidewalk outside his bodega. Samuel waved back, his smile quick but genuine. He liked this time of day, when the city felt like it belonged to him, when he could move through it without eyes following him, without whispers or assumptions. He turned on to St. Nicholas Avenue, the final stretch of his route. The milk bottles clinked softly, and the newspapers were stacked neatly, their edges curling in the damp air. He was thinking about school, about the history project he'd stayed up late finishing, about how Jamal had laughed when Samuel read his essay aloud, calling it too fancy for Mr. Thompson's class. Samuel grinned at the memory, his legs pumping the pedals as he coasted past a row of brownstones. Then he saw the flashing lights. A police cruiser pulled out from a side street, its red and blue strobes slicing through the dawn. Samuel's stomach tightened, but he kept pedaling, keeping his eyes forward. He'd seen cops on his route before. They usually ignored him, and he preferred it that way. But this time, the cruiser swung in front of him, cutting off his path. Samuel braked hard, the bike wobbling as he came to a stop. His heart thudded, but he kept his face calm. He'd done nothing wrong. 3 officers stepped out of the car. The first, a stocky man with a buzz cut and a name tag that read Officer Delaney, strode toward Samuel, his hand resting on the holster at his hip. The other 2, younger and leaner, flanked him, their faces unreadable. Samuel's grip tightened on the handlebars, but he forced himself to breathe. He was just delivering papers. He was just a kid. "Hey, kid," Delaney said, his voice sharp, like he was already accusing Samuel of something. "What you doing out here this early?" Samuel swallowed, keeping his tone steady. "Delivering papers and milk, sir. Same route I do every morning." Delaney's eyes narrowed, scanning Samuel's hoodie, his bike, the basket full of bottles and papers. "Papers and milk, huh? You got ID?" Samuel nodded, reaching slowly into his pocket. He knew better than to move too fast. He pulled out his school ID, holding it out with both hands. "Here, sir." Delaney didn't take it. Instead, he stepped closer, his shadow falling over Samuel. "You live around here? Or you just out here causing trouble?" "I live on Lenox," Samuel said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm not causing trouble. I'm just doing my job." The other 2 officers exchanged a glance, and one of them, a wiry guy with a thin mustache, snorted. "Your job? Kid like you out here at this hour? Looks suspicious to me." Samuel's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "I've been doing this route for 6 months. Ask Mr. Reyes at the bodega. He sees me every day." Delaney smirked, stepping even closer. "Don't get smart with me, boy. We got a call about a thief in the area. You fit the description." Samuel's heart sank, but he kept his composure. "I'm not a thief. Look." He gestured to the basket, where the milk bottles gleamed in the street light and the newspapers were clearly marked with delivery addresses. "This is my stuff. I'm dropping it off for people." The wiry officer stepped forward, grabbing one of the bottles and turning it over in his hands. "This don't prove nothing. You could have stolen this, too." "I didn't steal anything," Samuel said, his voice rising just a fraction. He caught himself, lowering it again. "I'm just trying to get to school on time." Delaney laughed, a cold, barking sound. "School? You think we're stupid? You're out here casing houses, aren't you?" "No, sir," Samuel said, his hands trembling now but still gripping the handlebars. "I'm telling the truth." The 3rd officer, who hadn't spoken yet, finally chimed in. "Let's see what's in your pockets, kid." "Empty." Samuel hesitated, then complied, pulling out a crumpled $5 bill, a house key, and a folded note. From Jamal that said, "Don't forget the pizza tonight." He held them out, his eyes meeting Delaney's. "That's all I got." Delaney's smirk faded, replaced by something harder, uglier. "You think you can talk your way out of this?" he said, stepping so close Samuel could smell the coffee on his breath. "You think you're smarter than us?" Before Samuel could answer, Delaney's hand shot out, grabbing the front of his hoodie and yanking him off the bike. The Schwinn clattered to the ground, milk bottles shattering on the pavement, the sharp tang of spilled milk filling the air. Samuel stumbled, catching himself on his hands, the asphalt biting into his palms. Get up, Delaney barked, but Samuel didn't have a chance. The wiry officer grabbed his arm, twisting it behind his back, and Samuel gasped as pain shot through his shoulder. Samuel nodded, reaching slowly into his pocket. He knew better than to move too fast. He pulled out his school ID, holding it out with both hands. Here, sir. Delaney didn't take it. Instead, he stepped closer, his shadow falling over Samuel. You live around here? Or are you just out here causing trouble? I live on Lennox, Samuel said, his voice calm but firm. I'm not causing trouble. I'm just doing my job. The other two officers exchanged a glance, and one of them, a wiry guy with a thin mustache, snorted. Your job? Kid like you out here at this hour? Looks suspicious to me. Samuel's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. I've been doing this route for 6 months. Asked Mr. Reyes at the bodega. He sees me every day. Delaney smirked, stepping even closer. Don't get smart with me, boy. We got a call about a thief in the area. You fit the description. Samuel's heart sank, but he kept his composure. I'm not a thief. Look. He gestured to the basket, where the milk bottles gleamed in the street light and the newspapers were clearly marked with delivery addresses. This is my stuff. I'm dropping it off for people. The wiry officer stepped forward, grabbing one of the bottles and turning it over in his hands. This don't prove nothing. You could have stolen this, too. I didn't steal anything, Samuel said, his voice rising just a fraction. He caught himself, lowering it again. I'm just trying to get to school on time. Delaney laughed, a cold, barking sound. School? You think we're stupid? You're out here casing houses. Aren't you? No, sir, Samuel said, his hands trembling now but still gripping the handlebars. I'm telling the truth. The third officer, who hadn't spoken yet, finally chimed in. Let's see what's in your pockets, kid. Empty. Samuel hesitated, then complied, pulling out a crumpled $5 bill, a house key, and a folded note. From Jamal that said, Don't forget the pizza tonight. He held them out, his eyes meeting Delaney's. That's all I got. Delaney's smirk faded, replaced by something harder, uglier. You think you can talk your way out of this? He said, stepping so close Samuel could smell the coffee on his breath. You think you're smarter than us? Before Samuel could answer, Delaney's hand shot out, grabbing the front of his hoodie and yanking him off the bike. The Schwinn clattered to the ground, milk bottles shattering on the pavement, the sharp tang of spilled milk filling the air. Samuel stumbled, catching himself on his hands, the asphalt biting into his palms. Get up, Delaney barked, but Samuel didn't have a chance. The wiry officer grabbed his arm, twisting it behind his back, and Samuel gasped as pain shot through his shoulder. Ms. Carter, the elderly woman who always waved from her stoop, pushed through the crowd, her housecoat flapping as she moved faster than her arthritis usually allowed. Who did this? She demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut through the murmurs. No one answered, but the weight of the truth hung heavy. Everyone knew who patrolled these streets, who drove cruisers with flashing lights. She knelt beside Mr. Reyes, her hands trembling as she touched Samuel's shoulder. Oh, child, she whispered, her eyes glistening. What they do to you? A young man in a delivery uniform, still holding a crate of vegetables, pulled out his phone and dialed 911. We need an ambulance on St. Nicholas now, he said, his voice urgent but steady. Kid's hurt bad. Looks like he got beat up. He's not moving. The operator's questions came fast, but the man, his name was Darius, kept his eyes on Samuel, his jaw tight. He'd seen Samuel before, pedaling past with that rickety bike, always in a hurry but never too busy to nod hello. Darius didn't know the kid's story, but he knew enough about Harlem to know this wasn't random. He stayed on the line, giving details, his free hand clenched into a fist. The ambulance arrived in under 10 minutes, its sirens slicing through the morning. Paramedics spilled out, their movements swift and practiced. A woman with a tight ponytail and a name tag reading Lopez knelt beside Samuel, her gloved hands checking his vitals. "Pulse is weak, but he's breathing," she called to her partner, a burly man already unloading a stretcher. "Multiple contusions, possible head trauma. We need to move fast." They worked with quiet efficiency, sliding a neck brace onto Samuel, lifting him carefully onto the stretcher. His body was limp, his face swollen, one eye sealed shut by bruising. The crowd parted, their faces a mix of grief and rage, as the paramedics loaded him into the ambulance. Mr. Reyes stood, his hands stained with milk and dirt, and grabbed Darius's arm. "You go with him," he said, his voice low but firm. "Someone's gotta stay with the boy." Darius nodded, climbing into the back of the ambulance without hesitation. He didn't know Samuel well, but he knew what it meant to be young and black in this city. He'd felt the weight of suspicious eyes, heard the edge in voices that assumed guilt before innocence. He sat beside the stretcher, watching Lopez hook Samuel up to monitors, her hands steady even as her lips pressed into a thin line. The ride to Harlem Hospital was a blur of sirens and beeping machines. Darius stared at Samuel, his chest rising and falling unevenly, his hoodie torn at the shoulder. "You're tough, kid," Darius muttered, more to himself than to Samuel. "You're gonna pull through." Lopez glanced at him, her expression softening for a moment before she turned back to her work, adjusting in for line. The ambulance jolted over potholes, and Darius gripped the edge of his seat, his mind racing. He thought of his own little brother. Samuel was whisked through double doors, Lopez barking stats to a doctor in scrubs. Darius followed as far as they'd let him, then sank into a plastic chair in the waiting area, his hands still shaking. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the linoleum floor. He pulled out his phone, hesitating. He didn't know Samuel's family, didn't know how to reach them. But he felt a responsibility to try. He called Mr. Reyes, who was still at the scene, gathering the scattered newspapers and broken glass from Samuel's bike. "You know his people?" Darius asked. "I know his name, Samuel Johnson," Mr. Reyes said, his voice heavy. "Lives on Lenox, I think. I'll ask around, see if anyone knows his folks." Darius thanked him and hung up, his eyes drifting to the double doors where Samuel had disappeared. He felt helpless, a stranger in a story that wasn't his, but he couldn't leave. Not yet. Inside the trauma bay, Samuel lay on a table, surrounded by a team of doctors and nurses. His hoodie was cut away, revealing a map of bruises across his ribs and back. An oxygen mask covered his face, and a monitor beeped steadily, tracking his heart. Dr. Patel, a wiry man with graying hair, scanned the CT results, his brow furrowed. "Severe concussion, possible brain bleed," he said to the nurse beside him. "We need to stabilize him and get him to ICU." The team moved with precision, but there was a heaviness in the room, a shared understanding of what had happened. They'd seen too many kids like Samuel, brought and broken by a system that was supposed to protect them. Hours passed. Darius stayed in the waiting room, sipping bitter coffee from a vending machine. He watched families come and go, some crying, some praying, some just numb. He thought of Samuel's bike, that beat-up Schwinn, and wondered what the kid had been saving for. A new pair of sneakers? A gift for someone? Darius didn't know, but he could tell Samuel was the kind of kid who worked hard, who cared about something bigger than himself. It made the image of him on the pavement even harder to shake. Mr. Reyes called back, his voice strained. I found his address, Lenox Avenue, apartment 4B. But no one's home. I knocked, asked the neighbors. His mom's a nurse, works nights. Dad's a mechanic. Probably at the shop. I left a note under the door. Darius nodded, though Mr. Reyes couldn't see it. I'll tell the hospital, he said. He approached the front desk, where a tired-looking receptionist took the information, promising to try calling Samuel's parents. She dialed the number Mr. Reyes had given, but it went to voicemail. She tried again. Nothing. In the ICU, Samuel lay in a sterile bed, tubes snaking from his arms, a ventilator hissing softly. His face was still swollen, but the nurses had cleaned the blood, revealing the boy beneath the bruises. He looked younger than 16, his features soft despite the damage. Nurse Thompson, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, adjusted. Finally, the double doors swung open, and a man burst into the waiting room, his work boots scuffed with grease, his flannel shirt untucked. Marcus Johnson was broad-shouldered, his face lined with years of hard work, his eyes wild with fear. His hands were still smudged with oil, as if he'd run straight from the garage. Where's my son? He demanded, his voice loud enough to turn heads. Samuel Johnson. Where is he? The receptionist stood, her voice calm but urgent. Mr. Johnson, I'll get someone to take you to him. He's in the ICU. She paged a nurse, and Ms. Green, the social worker, appeared, her notepad still in hand. She led Marcus toward the double doors, Darius trailing behind, unsure if he should follow but unable to stay put. In the ICU, Samuel lay as he had before, his face still swollen, the ventilator hissing rhythmically. The room was dim, the only light coming from the monitors casting a soft blue glow over his body. Marcus stopped short at the sight of his son, his breath catching in his throat. He stepped forward, his hands trembling, and reached for Samuel's hand, careful not to disturb the tubes. Sammy, he whispered, his voice cracking. What the hell happened to you? Darius stood in the doorway, his heart pounding. He wanted to tell Marcus everything, about the cops, the cruiser, the way they'd left Samuel bleeding, but the words stuck in his throat. Marcus's grief filled the room, raw and heavy, and Darius felt like an outsider, witnessing something too private, too painful. Nurse Thompson approached, her eyes kind but guarded. Mr. Johnson, we're doing everything we can, she said. He's stable, but he's in a coma. We're monitoring him closely. Marcus didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on Samuel, on the bruises marring his son's face, the way his chest rose and fell with the machine's rhythm. Who did this? He asked, his voice low at first, then rising, sharp and jagged. Who did this to my boy? No one answered. Nurse Thompson glanced at Miss Green, who shook her head slightly. Darius opened his mouth, then closed it, his hands clenched at his sides. Marcus's shoulders shook, and he leaned closer to Samuel, his voice dropping to a whisper. You're strong, Sammy. You hear me? You're gonna come back to us. But as he spoke, his voice broke, and his hands tightened around Samuel's, his knuckles white with rage and helplessness. The room seemed to hold its breath, the monitor's beeps the only sound. Marcus's anger was a living thing, radiating from him, filling the space with the promise of reckoning. He didn't know the full story yet. Didn't know the names of the officers or the cruiser's license plate, but his eyes burned with a father's fury, a vow to find answers. And as he stood there, staring at his unconscious son, the hospital's hum faded into the background, leaving only the question of what Marcus would do when he learned the truth. A question that hung in the air, sharp and unanswered, as the night stretched. Marcus turned to the doorway, where Darius stood, the young delivery driver who'd brought Samuel to the hospital. Darius's eyes were bloodshot, his delivery uniform rumpled, but he hadn't left, not even after hours of running from precinct to find Marcus. There was something in Darius's posture, shoulders squared, hands clenched, that told Marcus this stranger cared about Samuel, even if he didn't know why. "You saw it happen?" Marcus asked, his voice low, barely containing the storm inside him. Darius nodded, his jaw tight. "Not the whole thing. I saw the aftermath, him on the ground, milk bottles broken, papers everywhere. Cops were speeding off in a cruiser. I called the ambulance." He hesitated, then added, "I know what I saw, Mr. Johnson. They didn't stop to help him." Marcus's eyes narrowed, his hands curling into fists. "Cops," he repeated, the word bitter on his tongue. He'd grown up in Harlem, knew the weight of that word, the way it could mean protection for some and danger for others. He taught Samuel to be careful, to keep his head down, to stay respectful even when the world wasn't. But this was something else. This was his son, beaten into a coma, left like garbage on the street. "You know where it happened?" he asked. "Street Nicholas Avenue, near 127th, Darius said. "I can take you there." Marcus nodded, his mind already moving. He didn't trust the police to investigate this, not when they were the ones who'd done it. He needed evidence, something solid to hold on to, something to make sure whoever did this paid. He looked back at Samuel, his chest rising and falling with the machine's rhythm, and made a silent promise, "I'll make this right." Then he turned to Darius. "Let's go." The two men left the hospital, stepping into the Harlem night. The air was cool, carrying the sounds of the city. Car horns, laughter from a nearby bar, the faint pulse of music from an open window. Marcus's work boots thudded against the pavement, his flannel shirt still smudged with grease from the auto shop. Darius kept pace, his delivery bag slung over one shoulder, his eyes scanning the street as if expecting trouble. They didn't speak much, but there was an unspoken understanding between them, a shared determination to find answers for Samuel. They reached St. Nicholas Avenue, the spot where Samuel had been attacked. The street was quieter now, the early morning chaos replaced by the hum of evening life. The pavement still bore traces of the incident, a faint smear of milk, a few crumpled newspapers caught in a storm drain. Marcus knelt, touching the ground where his son had lain, his fingers brushing the cold asphalt. The image of Samuel, his lanky frame, his quick smile, his bike wobbling under the weight of his deliveries, flashed in his mind, and he squeezed his eyes shut, pushing back the tears. He couldn't break, not now. Darius pointed to a bodega across the street, its neon sign flickering. "That's Mr. Reyes's place." "Yeah," Marcus said, his voice rough. "I need to know what happened to my boy." "You saw it?" Mr. Reyes nodded, setting down the pack of Newports. "I saw the cruiser pull him over. 3 cops hassling him. He showed them the papers, the milk, but they didn't care. Called him a thief, started hitting him." His voice shook, his hands gripping the counter. "I wanted to stop them, but it happened so fast. By the time I got out here, they were gone, and Samuel was..." He trailed off, his eyes dropping. Marcus's hands clenched, his knuckles whitening. "You got cameras?" he asked, nodding toward the security system above the counter. Mr. Reyes hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, but the footage only keeps for 24 hours unless I save it. I didn't think to." He stopped, seeing the urgency in Marcus's face. "I'll check. Come around." They followed him to a cramped back room, where a grainy monitor displayed feeds from 2 cameras, one facing the counter, the other pointed at the street. Mr. Reyes rewound the footage, the timestamp showing 5:17 a.m. The screen flickered, then cleared, revealing Samuel on his bike, pedaling into view. Marcus's breath caught at the sight of his son, alive and moving, his hoodie flapping as he turned on to St. Nicholas. Then the cruiser appeared, cutting him off. 3 officers stepped out, their faces partially obscured by shadows but their movements unmistakable, aggressive, deliberate. Samuel held up his hands, gesturing to the basket, his body language calm but pleading. The officers didn't listen. One grabbed him, yanking him off the bike. The others joined in, fists and boots flying, Samuel's body crumpling under the blows. Marcus gripped the edge of the desk, his vision blurring with rage. Darius stood beside him, his jaw tight, his hands shaking. "That's them," Darius whispered. "That's what I saw." Mr. Reyes saved the footage to a USB drive, his hands trembling. "I'm sorry," he said, handing it to Marcus. "I should have done something." "You're doing something now," Marcus said, his voice low but steady. He slipped the drive into his pocket, the weight of it grounding him. "Any other cameras around here?" Mr. Reyes nodded. "The deli on the corner's got one. Maybe the bar across the street, too. They might have caught something." Marcus and Darius spent the next hours scouring the neighborhood, knocking on doors, asking for footage. The deli owner, a gruff man named Hassan, handed over a grainy clip that showed the cruiser's license plate as it sped away. The bar's camera caught a clearer shot of the officers' faces. Officer Delaney, the stocky one with the buzz cut, leading the pack. Marcus recognized the name from stories he'd heard, whispers of a cop who liked to throw his weight around. The footage wasn't perfect, but it was enough to identify them, enough to prove what they'd done. Back at the auto shop, Marcus's coworker, Jamal's uncle Reggie, offered to help. Reggie was a tech whiz, a former hacker who'd gone straight. The final video was damning, Samuel's voice, clear and calm, saying, "I'm just delivering papers, sir," followed by Delaney's sneer. "You think you're smarter than us?" The blows came next, relentless, until Samuel collapsed. Marcus watched it once, then turned away, his stomach churning. He couldn't watch it again, but he didn't need to. The images were burned into his mind. With the footage in hand, Marcus and Darius went to the 25th precinct, where Officer Martinez had helped find Samuel's family. Marcus's hands shook as he handed her the USB drive, his voice steady, despite the storm inside. "This is what happened to my son. I need you to find these officers." Martinez watched the footage, her face paling. "This is... I know these guys," she said, her voice tight. "Delaney, Peterson, and Walsh. They're with the 32nd. She looked at Marcus, her eyes filled with a mix of shame and resolve. "I'll run their badges, get their schedules. But you need to file a formal complaint. This has to go through the system." Marcus's jaw tightened. He didn't trust the system, not when it had failed Samuel so brutally. But he nodded, knowing the footage was his leverage. "I'll file it. But I'm not waiting for your system to work. I want their names, their addresses, where they are right now." Martinez hesitated, then leaned forward. "I can't give you that, Mr. Johnson. But I can make sure this gets to internal affairs. And I'll keep you updated, I promise." Marcus didn't like it, but he had no choice. He and Darius left the precinct, the USB drive copied and sent to Martinez, the original still in Marcus's pocket. They returned to the hospital, where Samuel lay, unchanged, his chest rising and falling with the ventilator's rhythm. Evelyn, Samuel's mother, had finally arrived, her nurse's scrubs wrinkled from a double shift. She sat beside Samuel, her hand stroking his hair, her eyes red from crying. "He was working to help his friend," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Jamal, the blind boy down the street. Sammy never told us." Marcus's heart twisted, pride and pain colliding. He hadn't known about Samuel's secret job, hadn't known his son was carrying that kind of weight. He kissed Evelyn's forehead, promising to find the men. Who'd done this? She nodded, her trust in him absolute, even as her tears fell. The next days were a blur of action and waiting. Marcus and Darius became a team, relentless in their pursuit. They met with community activists, who spread the footage online, sparking outrage across Harlem and beyond. Protests formed outside the 32nd precinct, signs reading "Justice for Samuel" and "End Police Violence." Marcus spoke at one, his voice raw but powerful, telling the crowd about his son, the boy who loved history, who helped his sister with her homework, who rode a beat-up bike to help a friend. The crowd roared, their anger echoing his own, but Marcus kept his focus. He wasn't here for speeches. He was here for answers. Martinez kept her word, feeding Marcus what she could. She confirmed the officers' names and their suspension pending investigation, but they were still out there, free while Samuel lay in a coma. Marcus couldn't sit still, couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. He spent his nights driving through Harlem, looking for the cruiser, for any sign of Delaney, Peterson, or Walsh. Darius joined him when he could, his delivery job now a distant memory, his boss's threats ignored. They checked bars, diners, anywhere cops might hang out off duty. They talked to informants, kids on the street who knew the officers' habits, piecing together their routines. One night, a tip came from Reggie, who'd been digging through social media and police chatter. "Delaney's got a regular spot," Reggie said, his voice low over the phone. "A bar on 145th, O'Malley's. He's there most nights, bragging about his takedowns. Peterson and Walsh tag along sometimes." Marcus's blood ran hot, but he kept his voice steady. "You sure?" "Dead sure," Reggie said. "I got a buddy who works the bar. Says Delaney was there last night, drinking. Like nothing happened." Marcus thanked him and hung up, his hands gripping the steering wheel of his old Ford pickup. He looked at Darius, who sat in the passenger seat, his eyes hard. "You don't have to come," Marcus said. "This ain't your fight." "It is now," Darius said, his voice quiet but firm. "For Samuel." They drove to O'Malley's, the bar's neon sign casting a red glow over the street. It was a dive, all sticky floors and dim lights, the kind of place where cops and locals mixed uneasily. Marcus parked a block away, his heart pounding. He didn't have a plan, not really, just a need to see them, to look into the eyes of the men who'd hurt his son. Darius followed, his steps silent, his delivery bag left behind. Inside, the bar was crowded, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the clink of glasses. Marcus scanned the room, his eyes landing on a corner booth where three men sat, their laughter loud and careless. He recognized Delaney immediately, the buzz cut, the broad shoulders, the smirk from the footage. Peterson and Walsh were there too, their faces familiar from the grainy video, their postures relaxed, as if they hadn't just shattered a boy's life. Marcus's hands shook, his rage a living thing, clawing at his chest. He took a step forward, his boots heavy on the wooden floor, his eyes locked on Delaney. Darius grabbed his arm, his grip firm. "Not here," he whispered. "We need them on record, not in a fight." Marcus's breath came in sharp bursts, his vision narrowing. He wanted to cross the room, to drag Delaney from that booth, to make him feel the pain he'd inflicted on Samuel. But Darius's words cut through, grounding him. He thought of Samuel, of the promise he'd made, of Evelyn's tear-streaked face. He couldn't lose control, not when his son needed him. He turned, forcing himself to walk out, Darius at his side. Marcus Johnson stood in the shadows of 145th Street, the neon glow of O'Malley's bar flickering behind him, the laughter of Officers Delaney, Peterson, and Walsh still ringing in his ears. His hands trembled. Not with fear but with a father's fury, a rage so deep it felt like it could split the pavement beneath his work boots. He'd seen their faces, confirmed their identities, and held the damning footage in his pocket, grainy but unmistakable proof of what they'd done to his son, Samuel, now lying in a coma at Harlem Hospital. But seeing them, hearing their careless laughter, wasn't enough. Marcus needed justice, not just for Samuel but for every kid like him, every family that had felt the weight of a system that protected its own while breaking the innocent. He turned to Darius, the young delivery driver, who'd become his unlikely ally, and said, "We're not done. Not by a long shot." Darius nodded, his jaw tight, his eyes reflecting the same fire. "What's the plan, Mr. Johnson?" Marcus didn't answer right away. His mind was racing, piecing together the steps ahead. He couldn't trust the police to handle this, not when the men who'd beaten Samuel were cops themselves. Internal affairs might investigate, but Marcus had seen too many cases buried, too many officers walk free. He needed to act, to make sure Delaney, Peterson, and Walsh faced consequences they couldn't dodge. But he also knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed help, people who understood the stakes, who'd seen what he'd seen, who felt the same righteous anger. Over the next few days, Marcus and Darius became a force of quiet determination in Harlem. They started with the community activists who'd already rallied behind Samuel's story, their protests outside the 32nd precinct growing louder each day. Marcus met with them in a cramped church basement on 129th Street, the air thick with the smell of coffee and old hymnals. The group was small but fierce. Reverend Carter, a gray-haired pastor with a voice like thunder, Aisha, a young lawyer who'd grown up in the neighborhood, and Reggie, Jamal's uncle, the former hacker who'd cleaned up the footage. There were others, too, mothers who'd lost sons, fathers who'd felt the same helpless rage. Kids who'd known Samuel from school. They called themselves the Justice Collective, a name that felt both defiant and hopeful. Marcus laid out the footage on a battered laptop, the room falling silent as they watched Samuel's beating play out again. Reverend Carter bowed his head, whispering a prayer. Aisha's hands clenched into fists, her legal mind already racing through strategies. Reggie leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "We got their faces, their badge numbers, their cruiser. This is airtight," he said. "But we can't just hand it over and hope. We need to make sure they can't wiggle out. That's why we're here," Marcus said, his voice steady but burning. "I'm not waiting for their system to fail, my boy. We're gonna find them, bring them in, and make sure the world sees what they did." The plan was risky, and everyone knew it. Aisha warned of legal consequences. Vigilante justice could backfire, taint the case, even land Marcus in jail. But Marcus wasn't swayed. "My son's in a coma," he said, his voice breaking but resolute. "They left him to die. I'm not letting them walk free while he fights for his life." The room murmured agreement, their shared pain forging a bond stronger than fear. They formed a tight-knit group, not a gang in the criminal sense, but a crew united by purpose. Reggie used his connections to track the officers' movements, tapping into street networks and social media chatter. Aisha drafted a legal strategy, preparing to file a formal complaint with the footage as evidence, but also ready to escalate if the system stalled. Darius and a few younger members, including Jamal, Samuel's blind friend, canvassed the neighborhood, talking to witnesses, gathering more footage from local cameras. They found a second angle from a traffic cam on 127th Street, showing the cruiser's path after the attack, and a third from a liquor store that caught Delaney's face clearly as he climbed back into the vehicle. Marcus coordinated it all, his days at the auto shop cut short, his nights spent planning in the church basement or sitting by Samuel's bedside. Evelyn, his wife, was a constant presence at the hospital, her Nurses training keeping her composed even as her heart broke. She didn't ask Marcus to stop, didn't question his late nights or the fire in his eyes. Just be careful, she whispered one night, her hand on his cheek. Sammy needs you here, not locked up. Marcus nodded, kissing her forehead, but he knew he couldn't stop. Not until Delaney, Peterson, and Walsh were held accountable. The Justice Collective zeroed in on O'Malley's bar, where Reggie's tip had led them. They learned the officers were regulars, often drinking there after shifts, their arrogance unchecked. Marcus and Darius staked out the bar for 2 nights, watching from Marcus's pickup parked a block away. On the third night, they saw the trio arrive, their laughter loud as they swaggered inside. Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles white. Darius put a hand on his shoulder. We stick to the plan, he said. No mistakes. The plan was simple but bold: confront the officers, restrain them, and deliver them to the 25th precinct. With the footage. No violence beyond what was necessary, no weapons, just enough force to hold them until the authorities could take over. Aisha had insisted on this. Any bloodshed would undermine their case, give the police an excuse to paint them as thugs. Marcus agreed, but the sight of Delaney's smirk tested his restraint. The collective gathered that night, a dozen strong, their faces set with purpose. Reverend Carter led a prayer before they left, his voice steady. Lord, guide us to justice, not vengeance. They marched the officers out of the bar, Jamal's camera capturing every step. Aisha was already on the phone with Martinez, who met them outside the 25th precinct with a squad of officers, her face grim but resolute. You did this the hard way, she said to Marcus, taking the USB drive. But you did it! The footage was undeniable. By morning, it was everywhere: local news, social media, even national outlets. Delaney, Peterson, and Walsh were suspended immediately, their badges stripped pending a full investigation. The Justice Collective's live stream went viral, the community's outrage fueling calls for reform. Aisha filed a civil suit against the NYPD, backed by the footage and witness statements from Mr. Reyes, Darius, and others. The case moved fast, the evidence too clear to bury. Within weeks, the officers were charged with assault, excessive force, and misconduct. Their trial was a media storm, every detail of Samuel's beating laid bare. Marcus sat through every court date, his hands clasped tightly, Evelyn at his side. He listened as the officers' lawyers tried to spin the story, claiming Samuel had been suspicious, that the officers had acted in self-defense. But the footage told the truth, and the jury saw it. Delaney, Peterson, and Walsh were convicted, sentenced to 7 years each, their careers ruined, their names synonymous with brutality. The courtroom erupted in cheers when the verdict came, but Marcus felt no joy, only a hollow relief. Justice had been served, but his son was still in a coma. Back at the hospital, Marcus spent every free moment by Samuel's side. The ICU was a world of beeps and sterile white, but Marcus made it his own, bringing Samuel's favorite comic books, reading them aloud in a low, steady voice. Evelyn sang gospel hymns, her voice soft but unwavering, filling the room with love. Nia, Samuel's little sister, drew pictures of their family, taping them to the walls, her small hands trembling as she whispered, "Wake up, Sammy." Jamal visited too, his cane tapping softly, his voice breaking as he thanked Samuel for the money he'd saved, money Jamal hadn't known was for him. Marcus prayed every night, his knees pressed into the hospital floor, asking for Samuel to come back. He didn't care about the protests, the news coverage, the community calling him a hero. He cared about his son's eyes opening, his voice calling out, his smile returning. The doctors were cautious, saying the coma could last weeks, months, or longer, but Marcus refused to lose hope. He'd fought for justice, and now he fought for Samuel's life, his love a beacon in the darkness. One evening, as the sun set over Harlem, casting a golden glow through the hospital window, Marcus sat by Samuel's bed, his hand wrapped around his son's.